everyone, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, sponsored by InfoProLearning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. Today, we're going to be joined by the hrlady. And I'm not just speaking in hyperbole, that's how Wendy Sellers, our guest today, is known, and that's actually the name of her company. But I think I could call her the hrlady even if that wasn't the case, because she's so knowledgeable about such a wide range of topics in our fields. Some of those very HR, some of those more into traditional learning and development. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can transform middle managers into strategic business leaders. We're going to talk about surveys, training programs, ROI measurement, connecting to the business, and just about everything else. And we've got a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get to it and meet our guest. Hello, Wendy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for being on. And Wendy, we have a really cool topic, that we want to get to today, which is really talking about how HR and training can transform middle managers into strategic business partners. But before we do that, one of our favorite things to do is to learn a little bit more about the people on our podcast. And particularly in our field, we find that people have such interesting ways to get to where they are today. So Wendy, if you would start by kind of give us your origin story. How did you get to where you are today?
Right, sure. So it was on accident, to be quite honest. I went to college for healthcare administration. I got a bachelor's and master's degree. When I ended up in that field for a very, very short period of time, I was like, oh, this is not me. This is way too slow and too many, too much red tape, which I'm still hopeful that'll go away someday. I was looking for a job. I moved from Pennsylvania to Florida looking for a job when we had these things called paper resumes. And I was walking in an elevator with my paper resume, and somebody who owned a recruiting firm said, "What are you looking for? Can you do HR?" And I said, "Yeah, I could figure that out." And that's it. So then, of course, I did go back to school and get a master's degree in human resources and every certification known to man. But it's kind of how I got started. I ended up in an architectural engineering firm that was growing. So I was their first HR person. And then by the time I left there was an entire team. We were in multiple countries, and we got bought out a few times. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to go do something else. So I went to another technology firm and then eventually just started my own business, the hrlady.
Lovely. What made you stick in HR? Like what makes you think that HR, training, talent, landscape, what is it that drew you to that?
I love fixing things. I love finding solutions or finding problems. And they're not usually the people, it's something else, but we blame the people. So I like finding the problems and helping the people that we blame to fix those problems, because often they're just part of an issue and nobody's listening to them, So I just like to help people get out of their own way.
Yeah.
It's usually upper management and ownership that's in everybody's way, and say, all right, if we can all do this together, we'd all be, going home at 5:00 happy.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And it is one of those things. It's just there's always some problem to solve, right? Like there's never a end point. There's never okay, well, I've put in my 8 hours, now I can go home. Or I mean, you eventually have to go home, but you never go home with the job fully done.
Yeah.
Well, and somebody who probably feels that pain more than any, as a very good segue that I didn't think of, is these middle managers, right? It's a really tough job being in that space. And what we're going to talk about today is how can leadership at training and HR transform these middle managers into real strategic business partners. But before we get into that, how do you define the middle manager? Where do these people really sit in the organization? What is your typical middle manager, would you say?
Well, I'm going to actually answer it in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to answer about the misconceptions of middle managers. And
Perfect.
So many people at the top, including HR, think of middle managers as task managers, that they're there to execute, but they are, but they should also be, part of the strategic team. They are part of strategic drivers of business outcomes. So too often they're just viewed as a doer or a worker bee. The reality is they're a bridge. They're a bridge between the higher ups, the executives, the VPs, and then from the actual employees who are going to be doing the work. So we need to be thinking of middle managers as much more influential than we think they are. And if we don't invest in their development, we're essentially leaving the entire strategy just to chance.
Right. Right. And how have you seen that shift? You mentioned kind of relating strategy to chance. Have you seen what is asked of that middle manager today? Like, is it different than what it used to be? Has it always been the same?
I would say it's definitely different than it used to be. Like, first of all, there used to not be middle management, right? There was top and there was supervisors, and that was it. And
True.
now, as companies grow, in any size, really, you could be a small company and have different levels of management, or you could be a giant company across the globe. I have seen it change in my career. I've been in HR almost 30 years, and I've definitely seen a lot of change where the smart companies are looking to middle managers saying, I need you. I'm not just going to
Hmm.
promote you to management just to keep you because you're about to walk out the door. Here's a fancy title. We're going to throw it on your nameplate over there, but we're not going to give you any training, and we're not going to actually listening to you. And so, unfortunately, many companies still do that. They just put the management title on somebody to get them to stay with the organization, but then they just have them still do the other things instead of actually developing them, training them, letting them lead, letting them manage. Most employees are, they're loyal to their manager. They're not necessarily
Hmm.
loyal to the company. So it is a smart thing to do to make sure that your middle managers are part of the leadership decisions. Maybe they're not going to make all the decisions, but at least get their opinions, because they are the ones that are touching and feeling and
Right.
seeing what's going on the front line.
Yeah. So before we get into kind of how can we, and usually we start with how do we help these people out, but what is maybe start with what happens if you don't? And what if you don't? What if you just let them kind of keep driving what they do with a nice title? What are
Yep.
the challenges that get presented?
So a couple things. One is they do nothing and they stay, right?
Hmm.
So they're ho-hum, their engagement's down. They probably have a bad attitude because you're not putting them to work the way you said you were going to when you promoted them. And so they either quit or they quit and stay. Right. So they quit and leave and take that institutional knowledge with them. And by the way, they probably take the employees with them too, because like I said earlier, employees stay for managers. They don't stay for the company. And
Hmm.
so if they quit and leave, they're probably going to take the employees with them at some point. If they quit and stay, meaning they're there, they're doing the bare minimum of the job, they're bringing everybody's morale down. It's not just their own morale, it's everybody around them too, that they're, kicking the tires together. And that's going to cause productivity issues. It's going to cause issues in brand,
Yeah.
whether the external customers or just your brand and candidates. And that's going to cause obviously a revenue problem.
So then how do we go about engaging them? Like what are some ways that we can start having these middle managers? And one of the things, that we really talked about was making them strategic business partners, and I think that's really the key. Would you agree is really trying to figure out how do we get these people aligned to what the business is trying to solve versus necessarily just being let's promote the best widget maker, and now they're just the best widget maker with a better title. How do we actually hook them into the business?
Yeah. So one thing that I like to do with my clients, I'm an HR consultant. And so what I like to do with my clients is either surveys or committees or often both. And so getting people from all areas of the business in like a committee. You're rolling out a new project, for example, or you're revising a project, you're revising something that you're selling. Don't just get the executives involved, because no offense, executives, and be offended, I don't really care. But the point is, you usually don't know what's going on. Everybody else knows what's going on with the project. They know the widgets that fit in what holes and what needs to be
Hmm.
addressed and fixed and resolved or brushed off. And we forget to ask the actual worker bees and the supervisors of the worker bees and the managers, the middle managers. Everyone should be at the table when we're making changes. And then doesn't mean they need to be there all the time. I love having committees where maybe we have a temporary committee over the next 3 months. We're going to meet on a weekly basis and everybody's going to be all hands on deck. And then eventually people are going to roll off that committee, and then the committee is going to get disbanded because we got the problem solved. But we asked everybody, who should be asked, to come to the table with your ideas. So you could also do that in survey form too, whatever your culture is. The problem with surveys is if you already have an issue, even a little bit of a low engagement, or there's a lack of trust, nobody's filling out your survey,
Hmm.
They're definitely not. They don't want to track back to them. Anything online, they automatically think, and it's true, that you can figure out who said what, track back to their URLs and their emails. So a lot of people won't do surveys, but if you invite them to a meeting, they might actually go in there and say, yeah, I got a problem and I want to talk about it. And if you let them talk, even if it's not a polished conversation, you've let them talk and you actually listen to them, they may say, you know what, the company's trying, I'm going to stick around and I'm going to help.
Yeah, I do think there's something about that. And you mentioned, as an external consultant, Wendy, we do swim in similar circles as a consulting company as well, where it's a hard line for us to balance when we tell clients, listen, it's sometimes even hard for you to get that knowledge as the company, as the head of HR or wherever you are going to an employee and asking them to share the details. Sometimes it's easier to get it from you leveraging an outside partner, yourself, ourselves, whoever it is, because we have no axe to grind, right? We're there to just capture what is it. And like you said, there's the benefit. There's so many benefits. The benefit to the person to say, oh, these people care enough to bring in somebody else and do this. Benefit to the company of, oh, this person with outside perspective is going to come in and share exactly what we want. So it's such a good thing. So, we do the strategy and now we have a pretty good sense. What's the next? What do we do with that information once we have these surveys?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And thank you for asking that, because too often companies will do surveys and they don't even look at the results, or they see the results and they're just like, oh, we can't do this. This is impossible. We're just going to ignore it. And it's like, well, if you do that, those employees are never going to give you feedback ever again.
Yeah.
And I have to say, the people that can find another job will. And so your good talent's going to walk out the door because you asked them for feedback. They gave feedback. You didn't even do anything about it. Even if you can't do something about it at that time because of money or whatever it might be, at least have that conversation with the general population of your staff. Just say, this is the feedback that we got. We can't do this, but we could do that. And so we'll work, in small increments. People are human. They understand that not everything can be done immediately because it costs money or maybe a board won't approve it. But don't expect them to stick around. If they say, I need this change in the company or I can't stay here, expect turnover. And there's some companies that have a lot of turnover and they're okay with that. And that's fine. I probably wouldn't work with you because I wouldn't want my name associated with that. But you're going to have a huge recruiting budget and probably a big budget for your law firms too.
So, out of these surveys, and one of the things that we usually do, right? So we have these results, but you can't do everything, right? You can't address everybody's problem. How do you help organizations? And, if you're internal to an organization now and you've done this survey, how do you prioritize what to work on when, because we don't have unlimited budgets, some of us have no budget. What do we do? How do we prioritize what comes out of that survey to make something that actually is meaningful to these middle managers?
Yeah, so you probably need to do a skills assessment, like who do we have that works at this company? What are their skills? Truly, what are their skills? They may have skills that we don't even realize they have because we just put them in a box and said, you're going to be doing this widget over here. You're going to do this project over here. We're not going to bring you to the table. And I mean this for everybody, not just for managers.
Totally.
And so number one thing is doing a skills assessment. And again, that could be something very high level or it could be very detailed. So you can make it fit every single budget. You can do it on your own just by telling your employees like, hey, give me a brushed up version of your resume or, fill out some information on, again, another survey or something like that so that we could figure out what skills do you have that we're not putting to use and what skills would you like to be put to use so that you're happier and you're engaged. And then maybe you'll actually care about what goes on in this company. And in turn, we have to turn around and care as well. I had one client that was like a mid-sized tech company. They were struggling with turnover, definitely at the middle management level. And the issue was that managers felt caught between the leadership level's high expectations and then their frontline employees' needs. And they said, we can't do both of these given the amount of employees we have to manage and the time that we have. There's only so much time in the day. So they didn't have the skills or the authority to go ahead and move forward. So we worked on creating like a development program that combined leadership training with real-time business problem solving. So instead of just generic, vague management workshops, we aligned the training directly with their current business challenges, which, by the way, we knew what they were. The executives know what the challenges are, but we did an employee survey and we got a lot of great feedback from the employees that said, hey, you asking for my opinion? Here's my opinion. And we implemented a lot of things that the employees said, this is what we see needs to change. After that, there was a 35% improvement in manager employee engagement scores, and then a 20% drop in the middle management turnover. And then we actually had a leadership pipeline that worked because now those middle managers stayed. stayed longer and eventually got promoted to, VPs. And so everybody else in the company saw like, oh, I could stay with this company for a while and go somewhere if I wanted to. Not everybody wants to be a manager, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, that's one of those interesting things I learned in my, career is I was kind of always after growth. And as I started managing teams, I realized that some people are happy being where they are. And as long as that value driver is there for the business, that's a great spot for them. And you don't need to push, your agendas onto others of, oh, let's make them grow for the sake of growing. Sometimes they can be your best performer. And the reason they are is because that's what they like to do.
Right.
And don't make them do something they don't. But one of the things you really mentioned that I think is always, and people that listen to this podcast are probably tired of it, but I always try to pull everything back to business performance. And that's exactly what you said is if you take the results of those surveys and you're able to tie in a business metric around it, because as you said, your executives and everybody knows what those are, that really can help you focus on what you need to drive first and foremost. But it also kind of helps, in my experience, it helps with this problem of buy-in from the lead. If you need more money, maybe you've been given 50 grand, which is not, for a large organization, not nearly enough money to make a difference across all of your mid-level managers. But if you go back and say, hey, well, for 50 grand, I can only touch this one topic, which is going to hit this business driver. Now, if you want me to hit these other business drivers, forward looking, maybe remote employee, whatever it should be, I'm going to need an extra 200 grand. And then it becomes a business decision. It's no longer you
Right.
asking for money. You are giving them an investment choice. And it's up to them of what level of investment do they want to make in solving this problem. So, ties it back. And the other thing I really like that you said is just being a little bit open and transparent. You mentioned it early on of the results of the survey. Even if you don't have the money for all, people are pretty smart and they're willing to work with you. If you say, listen, thanks for taking this survey. As a result, we're going to tackle these things. There's lots of other things we'd love to get to as budget allows. So don't let this idea of not being able to solve every problem that you showcase in your survey be the reason to not do one. At the end of the day is really what I'm saying. So we have this, we've done the survey, we've connected to the business, and we've said, here's kind of your strategies, and here's what we think we can solve. What are some of those? There's no silver bullet, of course, and the reason that people like you exist in the consulting space is to solve specific problems. But what are some of those themes that you're seeing these days? If you were to take your last 15, 20 projects, are there some themes that you think are kind of cross-cutting that you're seeing a lot of organizations need to improve in their middle management?
Yeah, I would say, what we already talked about is like, are the managers staying? And even if they are staying, are they engaged? Are their teams engaged? So that's, engagement and retention is huge. Performance metrics, what kind of performance metrics do you even have in your organization? Has productivity improved in teams that are led by trained managers, by experienced managers, or just by people that are, randomly promoted to management to make them stay? So performance metrics are huge. So I want to, ask the listeners, do you even have performance metrics at your company? You might have something called, key performance indicators, KPIs. I use SMART goals for my customers because I just think they're very easy to understand. They're not always easy to create, but we have this wonderful thing called AI now that can help you with that. But, for example, I put together before our call today, just like a SMART goal for a receptionist. People would never even think like, oh, we should have a SMART goal for a receptionist. They just answer the phone and greet people. It's like, no, you should have some kind of goal, whatever you want to call it. But, I summarize this one as, improving front desk efficiency by reducing call wait times to 20 seconds and visitor check-in to 1.5 minutes from 3 minutes, which was 3 months ago. How are you going to achieve to do this? Receptionist is implementing a digital log, updating phone scripts, completing customer service training. So everybody in your organization can have performance indicators. If you as a manager don't know what the performance indicators are, then the employees don't know what they are. And so they're just coming to work, putting out fires every day. And then we're mad at them because we never actually gave them performance goals. And so very, very important to have some kind of performance metrics, whether you're using traditional KPIs, just asking people to improve. But how are they going to do that? You have to give them the resources to do that. So in that case, the receptionist, I said about customer service training. if you expect them to improve their customer service, but you don't give them any training,
Yeah.
it's just you're blowing a wish into the air and hoping that it sticks somewhere, and it's not going to. So training is very important for everybody in the company, but definitely for business middle managers. And I often get asked the question, like, what should we even train managers on? Supervisors, middle managers, executives, I don't care what the title is, but if they are managing people or they're managing a project, they need to have training on like business acumen, understanding financials and operations and market dynamics. They don't need to be an expert at it, but they need to understand it a little bit so that when you're having these conversations with them, it doesn't go in one ear and out the other. Communication is the biggest thing, though. They influence so many people, actions, reactions, including customers as well. And so we have to, make sure that we're teaching our managers how to communicate. The old school thought of, oh, well, I have the title, I'm in charge, I have the authority. Nah, that's been gone a long time ago. You have to use your communication, your words, including text messages and emails, to influence people to want to agree with you and want to work with you and for you. And then again, going back to, the data-driven decision making. When people say, oh, I have a gut feeling, it just makes me want to explode, because I'm like, guts don't have feelings. That's not what that is. It's probably based on a past incident. That's why you're feeling that way. But you really should be thinking of making decisions with not just by going, I'm having a good day today, let me go buy this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so all of us, any of these projects and everything we've mentioned always has great goodwill and usually starts with good buy-in, right? Yeah, let's do this. Let's get it across the line. But we all know that along the way, we face some of those, what do we call them, roadblocks or whatever, stumbling blocks, brick walls or stumbling blocks that get in our way. And how do you help people to solve those?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is most humans have a resistance to change,
Yeah.
right? All of us, including me. And I love change. I love change, but I love when it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, because I just like fixing things. So I like change, but when I wake up, I'm like, oh, please don't let anything change today, because I really need to get through my schedule, which I never get through everything that's on my agenda because I'm the HR lady, so my phone's ringing. But just understand that most people have a resistance to change. And depending on their personality style, the personality trait, what their experience has been in the world and life at work, they may have a bigger resistance to change. So managers and HR and executives, they need to get to know every single one of their employees. If I'm going to go along with change a lot quicker than somebody else is, somebody else might be like, no, I'm not changing. And if you want me to, I need like 90 days notice. Well, that's just not the reality. So if you know they're going to blow up in a meeting, right? Why don't you give them at least a 24-hour notice? Say, hey, I got to tell you some confidential information that's going to be in the meeting tomorrow. I know you're not going to like it, so I want to give you 24 hours to think about it so that you can remain calm in the meeting tomorrow. They're still probably going to be upset, but they're going to respect that you knew them enough to say, okay, I need more information. And so it's not always plausible, right? We can't always share information with all our employees. We just can't, especially in HR land where things are very confidential. But for senior leaders, I ask you to show middle managers, give them training on how whatever you're directing them to do or not do, how it directly relates to the business results, how it relates to the outcomes we're all looking to achieve, or whether it's retention, better revenue, innovation. So explaining that to them and then showing them, this is why we're forcing you to go through the training on, whatever, accounting stuff. They might be thinking, this has nothing to do with me. Well, it does. You just don't see how it's connected. So now I'm going to explain it to you, and then we're going to go through the training together. And then for middle managers, make training hyper relevant to their daily challenges. If they don't feel that it's useful today, it's going to go in one ear and out the other, and they're not going to engage today, never mind tomorrow. There's a huge, powerful approach to peer influence as well. And so if you are having a difficult time with the middle manager, see if there's another middle manager things are going well. And if they're friends, see if you can get them to do some coaching for you. You have to be careful. You have to tread with that very lightly because it could backfire. And that's where you need to get HR involved.
Yeah, so many threads that I just totally love. But the one that I think resonates me with the most is the connecting it. It's like the what's in it for me. But I think that you should be able to find a way to do the what's in it for me and what's in it for the business almost in one. And if you can connect those two things, I think you've done a really good service. There's this book called Made to Stick. It's a great marketing. Well, it's for marketers, but it's about engagement. And it says, when there's a military plan, the plan is to capture the hill. Now, what the helicopter pilot is being told is something different than a foot soldier or artillery, radio, ops. They're all being told capture the hill, and then 50 different, everybody has their marching orders of how they're going to do that, because they know that once the bullet is fired, all the training, everything goes out the window. But you know what? If at least I know to capture the hill, we're going to be going in the same direction. And I think that so many times we get it wrong for either thinking that the people know that we're trying to capture the hill, or we haven't communicated, or the person doesn't know what the hill means. They don't know why that's important to the business. Maybe they know to capture the hill, but they don't know why they should capture the hill. And so I really resonate with that so much. So really good there. Wendy, before we end this session, I want to give an opportunity. We've talked and covered a lot of ground about how HR can help transform middle managers into these strategic business partners. What's some of the key takeaways that you want to leave with people that are, maybe they're a middle manager trying to like HR, or the other way around, or they're in the training business? What are the final thoughts you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so where I see right now, like the future of HR and middle management is, I see a lot of shifts. Of course, I've already mentioned one of them in here today, which is about AI. So AI and data-driven leadership is huge. And, that can work together now that we have AI. We still need to get the data though. So if you're not collecting any kind of data, you're not doing SMART goals or other kind of, key performance indicators, then AI is not going to help you analyze that. So we do need to be, giving performance metrics and then using data-driven decision-making in leadership. And again, this is all of leadership, not just middle management. But managers are going to need to make decisions based on analytics, not just those gut feelings, not just experience. And HR has to work with them to equip those middle managers with data literacy skills. Why are we collecting this data and what are we going to use for that? So maybe in some organizations, it might not be HR. It might be maybe, a CFO that's helping to handle that. The second thing is also something that's not new since the pandemic, but the hybrid work evolution. The role of managers is driving culture, driving engagement, and driving performance. And more employees want to be remote, or at least partially remote. And you know what? I don't blame them, because if you can do the same job fully remote or partially remote, and it makes you happier, and it saves you as an employee money for childcare, dog care, whatever it might be, or even just gas, then why wouldn't we want to do this? Why wouldn't we want to help people? Now, there are certain roles that, of course, cannot be remote, right? Because they make things with their hands, and they have to physically be there. But do they have to be there, 6 days a week for every single week? Can the one day a month be remote where they're doing forms or something like that? If you even gave a regular employee one day a week, one day a month remote work where they're doing some policy or form or training, they'd probably be thrilled to do that, because they don't have to drive that day and get through traffic. The third thing that I see is HR as a coach, not just a policy enforcer. And this has also, it's nothing new, but I think some people just need to be reminded of this, that forward-thinking companies are transforming HR into a true business advisory function. This means that they're there to support the managers with insights and training and data analytics, and helping the managers help the employees do their job, not just going tisk tisk, you violated a policy. That's, to me, more like where a lawyer would come in. But if if I had a wish, that's what it would be, like HR as a coach, as a mentor, not just a policy enforcer. So there's some of the things that I see are happening now and need to continue happening in the HR space, in the middle management space, but then even in, the executive management space as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, Wendy. And thank you for sharing so much time and wisdom with us. And we'll make sure, again, Wendy Sellers is that she keeps mentioning she's the HR lady, has her own podcast, has a ton of great content. Connect with her on LinkedIn. She's a phenomenal follow. If you follow her for a week and don't learn anything new, then maybe, call me and be on the podcast, because we'd love to talk to you, because you must know a lot. Thank you so much, Wendy. This has been a blast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care, everybody.